Okay, we're going to talk today about what to do if there's a supermarket that's owned by a Jewish person, and that's a supermarket. They sell chametz, they buy chametz, and they're running the regular business over the whole Pesach. And the question is whether the person can buy their chametz there after Pesach. He was Yid who seemingly it's a supermarket that has a Yid who owns it, and it's owned over Pesach by a Jewish person. It seemingly should be chametz over Pesach, which the din is if a Yid owns chametz over Pesach, the chametz is usher for him, it's usher for everybody else. He can't eat it, and he can't have enough from it. So we're going to talk about some questions having to do with these big supermarkets where there's a Jewish person who owns it. We're not going to talk. There's a few things that we're not going to talk about. Okay, we're not going to talk about how do you figure out if the Jewish person, if the owners are Jewish. If you just go to your regular supermarket, you may have no idea. So we're not going to talk about how you figure it out, or if you're mechuyev to figure it out. Maybe you could just close your eyes and ignore the whole question, and not think about it. We're talking about that you know that they are. We're not talking about another shaila which is also very relevant, and that is if there's a Jewish distributor. Sometimes the supermarket itself might be owned by someone who's not Jewish, but the distributors who are feeding the food to that supermarket, they themselves are Jewish. That's another challenge. We're not going to talk about that either. That's not part of today's discussion. We're also not going to talk about, let's say we decided that the food is usher, how should you decide when the store got rid of their chametz? They don't keep the chametz forever, or after a certain amount of days it's all sold out. How do you figure out when it's sold out? Or how do you figure out, or what do you do when you're not sure if they sold out all their chametz or not? You don't know if this box of cookies is from stuff that they had on Pesach or they didn't have on Pesach. Okay, so there's lots of questions about this that we're not going to talk about. But we're going to talk about, just focus on a specific shaila, and that is, you have a company that's owned by a Yid. Now, to make things a little more complicated, do you have a question? Okay, to make things a little more complicated, a little more interesting, we're going to talk about what happens when the simple case is a Yid owns the whole store. We're going to talk about a variable to it, which is what happens if the Yid doesn't own the whole store. The Yid is just one of the partners in the store. So there's a store that has a number of partners to it, and one of them is a Yid. Not all of them, but one of those partners is a Yid. Okay, so and then we're going to talk about two main reasons, or two main ways that food could be mutter. Okay, the first is going to be a possibility that if the Yid is only a part owner, maybe that in itself is enough to be matter the food. That's one possibility. And the second is maybe if the Yid did a Mechiras Chametz, some form or some levels of Mechiras Chametz, maybe that would be enough. And we'll talk about the different ways that could play itself out, what kind of Mechiras Chametz you could make, and whether that should make a difference. Okay. Before we get really into it, I'll mention that there's a store in this area that has a Yid owns a little restaurant within a big supermarket. But there it's simple, because that Yid closes his restaurant on Pesach. Of course, he's not open on Pesach. He's a from person. He's not open on Pesach. So he's closed on Pesach. So he has no problem. He buys his chametz that he needs from before Pesach. He keeps it. He doesn't use it on Pesach. We're talking about the person. He has chametz. He's running a supermarket. You would never know that it was Pesach. Okay. The first is like this. There's a tshuva from a sefer called Zecher Yitzchok. Zecher Yitzchok, Yitzchok Panavision. The tshuva was written about 100 years ago. It's tshuva chesed sefer, and he says he wants to be mekel based on two things. One of the things that he's mekel on, with his Yid is only a partial owner, is he has two things to be mekel on. One is that since the store is set up as a corporate entity, it's not set up as a private ownership. It's set up as a corporate entity. Legally, the corporate entity does not belong to that specific person. The corporate entity is its own being. It's not owned by. I own the corporation, and the corporation owns the chametz, but I don't own the chametz. So he wants to be maker because of that. That in its whole own shaila of whether we should treat a corporation, as an entity that's not the actual owner. That's a shaila we're actually not going to get into. That's a bigger shaila. We're going to assume lahachmer on that just because it's owned by a corporation doesn't make it not owned by a Jew. Okay, let's put that on the side. But the Zecher Yitzchok has another side, that's what we will talk about, which is, he says, if the Yid only owns part of the company, less than half of the company, then the Yid's portion of the ownership of the company is like Batal B'Roiv. It doesn't exist. Most of the company is not Jewish, so the company is considered to be not Jewish. So he wants to be Mekel. He says he could Mekel because of that. And as we'll talk a little bit, we'll see that many Nachronim did not agree with that understanding. And as follows: the Shagatari talks about the following shaila. What happens if you had a Yid and a Goy who were partners in Chametz before Pesach? And they had a partnership over Pesach. So the Shagatari assumes, as do many, which is what we're heading to, which he assumes that of course that Chametz is usher. What happens if the partners split up their partnership after Pesach? Okay, the 2 days after Pesach they break up and they split it up, and the way they split it up is that they say, you partner who own 3/4 of it, you take 3/4 of the merchandise, and I own 1/4, I take 1/4 of the merchandise. So we split up the stores. We had 4 stores, so you take 3 stores and I take 1 store. So now when they split it up, so now that's an example of Breira. That we should say, now that the partners broke apart the partnership, and we decided that these shelves in the store belong to you, to the Yid, and these shelves in the store belong to the guy, we now know that all along, the partnership really was, the Yid owned these parts and the guy owned those parts. So, if we would be able to say Breira, then the Yid's portion, the Yid's portion would be Aser, but the guy's portion would be Mutter. So although they were partners on Pesach, the part that the guy ends up with, that part is going to end up being Mutter. Okay, so we'd say, if you could say Breira, it would be Mutter. So he wants to say, there's a rule. It's a suffix whether there's Yesh Breira or Ein Breira, and therefore the halacha is, by Deraises we're Machmir at Ein Breira, by Darbanans we're Mekel at Yesh Breira. So Mamela, since Chametz Shavua Pesach is only Isser Rabbanan, so we could be Mekel and say Yesh Breira b'Drabanan. So the part that the guy ends up with, that part ends up being it turns out, it was always the guys, so the guy owned it on Pesach, not the Yid. If a guy owns Chametz on Pesach, it's Mutter. So, Yesh Breira b'Drabanan will tell us that if the Yid and the guy split up after Pesach, then the Chametz is going to be Mutter. Okay, this is what Shag says. Shag Tshuva in Tafnam Chespen, so does the Mishabur, that you could be Mekel. What happens if they didn't split it up? The underlying assumption is that if they didn't split up, then it would be Aser. It's only Mutter because we get to Yesh Breira. And the Mechiras Chametz speaks this out clearly. He says it from a Ramashik, that if they didn't split up, then it's going to be Aser. It's going to be Aser. If they didn't split up after Pesach, the Chametz will be Aser. Why? Because we're going to look at it that the Yid and the Goy each have a full ownership in the Chametz over Pesach. Until they split up, they each have a full ownership. Well, I bought it from Chametz that was owned by Yid. So that is to say, the fact that the Yid only owns a small portion, less than 50%, is not going to be moderate. There's a little sharatzin about it in Tafnam Ches. So he says that there are those who say Yesh Mitzvah and that it's Batal B'Roiv, but he says he's not so happy about that. Okay? The guy says the sharatzin is not so happy about that. Okay, so this is, you were seeing that Achronim are saying, assuming, or many of the Achronim are assuming that the fact that the Yid owns less than 50% is not enough to make. Okay, and if you look in Reb Shimon Eider's Sefer on Hilchos Pesach, he brings that Ramosha told him, he brings a machlokes about this. He doesn't bring the Zecher Yitzchok that we mentioned, but he brings that Ramosha told him that you should be machmir. If the Yid owns a meaningful amount, you should be machmir. I'll explain what that term means in a second. If the Yid owns a meaningful amount, you should be machmir. But Rabban Kotler said you could be mekel that was Batal B'Roiv. Okay, so according to Rabban Kotler, which is going along the lines of the Zecher Yitzchok, he doesn't quote it, but along those lines you could be mekel. According to Ramosha, the way he's quoting it, you'd have to be machmir. What does it mean you should have a meaningful share? So there's a tshuva from Moshe. It's actually in Chelik and answer, but it's at the end of the tshuva. Moshe says, Moshe is talking about a Yid, if I remember correctly, a Yid and going to have partners for Shabbos. And Moshe has a question: is what happens when a person owns stocks? If I own stock in the company, so if I own one share of Entenmann's Donuts, does that mean that I am now a partner in that company? In Ramosha's case, it's in ribbis. That now if that company lends money, am I lending it for ribbis? Or in our cases, if I own one share of that company, am I now considered to own chametz over Pesach? Because that company, it's a bakery. That's all they do is sell chametz. So maybe my owning that share makes me be considered to be owning chametz. So Ramosha said like this. He says, if the Yid just bought some shares as an investment he's a 13-year-old boy who decided his bar mitzvah money should go to invest into stocks. So he bought 3 shares of some company, and he has no say. He has no real ownership. Although technically on paper he has ownership, but it's not considered he really has ownership, and therefore the din is, Ramesh says that's not considered an owner. But if he has a large share, or he has a small share, but that share gives him a voice in the company, if you would own 1% of General Motors, that's a big share of the company. Coca-Cola, anybody who owns 1 share would be a big owner. If you have enough that you have a say, or you have just not a large amount, that 20% ownership, that person is considered to be a real owner. Okay, so we would apply that to here also. If the person owned 15% of a company, of a supermarket, we'd say that's a meaningful amount of ownership. If he's one of a couple of partners, that's a meaningful ownership, and that would make the chametz asur. That's how Rabbi Eider brings what Moshe says. And he brings Rabbi Aaron argues, that's how he brings what Moshe says. However, when we talked to Rabbi first about this question once, Rabbi first said that that Moshe told him, he even remembers the day, Rabbi first even has it in his notes, that it was on March 22nd, 1977, okay, that Moshe told him that if the Yid has less than 50%, you could be Mekel, and the way he said it was, since it's an Issa D'Rabbanan, we can assume that it's Batal Baroiv, and the Yid's share is Batal. If the Yid owns less than 50%, then it's Mutar. Okay, so here Shimon Eiger says, brings Rav Moshe to be machmir about that. Rabbi first tells us that Rav Moshe told him otherwise. So now, at first it sounds a little funny, because the Print Teshuva, I mentioned in Ebenezer, which is not talking about chametz, the Print Teshuva in Ebenezer gives this whole way of deciding how a stock owner is or is not a meaningful amount. So Rabbi Friedman wrote something in the Chosh Mishpah, printed kuntras about Hilchos Ribbis this year. They printed a kuntras about Hilchos Ribbis. In it, Rabbi Friedman talks about the Shaila, Rabbi Chaim Friedman, and he wants to be mechalik that Rabbi Moshe only was talking about Shabbos over there, and maybe he'd be making one other thing. Okay. Anyhow, so we have a number of shittas here. We have a Zecher Yitzchok who says if the Yid owns less than 50%, then it's mutter. Rabbi Kotler went along with that. It's reported that he went along with that. A number of the Achronim, the Shagas Ari, seems to not go like that. Rabbi Moshe, we have a question which way he went on that. So we have a shaila which way to go on this question. So when we spoke to Rabbi Schwartz about it, Rabbi Schwartz was very comfortable being samech on the Zecher Yitzchok. The Zecher Yitzchok says if the Yid owns less than 50%, then it's not the chametz that partnership owns is not asur, and therefore it's mutar after Pesach. And others are willing to be samech on that also. So if you're going to say like that, then it's mutar. There's no question. It will depend. If the Yid owns less than 50%, then the food in the supermarket is mutar. If the Yid owns more than 50%, the chametz in the supermarket is going to be asur. And so you have to find it out. Is it more or less? But that means that even if he has a meaningful share, it would be mutar. So we would have to think about the second child who's there Mechiras Chametz. And think about any of that stuff. Doesn't make a difference. As long as the Yid owns less than 50%, you're safe and you're clear, and you can go home now. You don't have to think about any more shilas. Okay? So that's one side, one big side. Again, Rabbi Schwartz said, you could be samach on that. If it's less than 50%, you could be samach on that, and you could eat the food, no problems. Okay. But now there's another side. Let's move to our second side, which is there a type of Mechiras Chametz? Is there a way that they could do Mechiras Chametz, and that's your own? Whether they do some regular Mechiras Chametz, will that be good enough? So, the best type of Mechiras Chametz in this situation, the best type is usually not the type that gets done. Okay, the best type of Mechiras Chametz would be like this. Again, what I'm about to describe works when there's partners, a Yid and a Goy who own the same supermarket. And that is to say, what they would do is, the Yid would say to the Goy, for the 8 days of Pesach, okay, so 8.5 days, because it has to be Erev Pesach also, okay, so for the 9 days that include Pesach, I'm selling to you, my partner, my full share of this company. And in exchange for the fact that I'm selling you my shares for these 9 days, you partner sell
his whole share?
Right, he's selling... Can
he sell 1% and then I'll make him 49% owner?
Oh, well, yeah, if he bounces himself down to being less than 50%, we get back to the Zecher Yitzchok. I'm talking about, you don't want to be samach on the Zecher Yitzchok. So he says, I own 15%. Okay, I own less than 50%. I'm going to sell out my shares for the days of Pesach. For these 9 days, you own it. It's all yours now for these 9 days. And in exchange for that, I just gave you away something very valuable. I gave you a company for 9 days. Okay, my share is worth millions of dollars. In exchange, in the summer, we'll pick some days from June 1st to June 10th, you're going to sell me your shares of the company. And what we're going to do is, we're going to be exchanging for these days you own my shares, for those days I own your shares. And that type of a mechir, where they're exchanging their shares, gives a certain legitimacy to the sale. Because if you would just sell the whole company to somebody else, to a guy, if you sell it to this person for these days, how come he's not earning any profits? How? And also, if you sell it to just someone in the street, not your partner, you sell it to someone in the street, why do you trust that person? Does it seem reasonable that you're signing a piece of paper, selling something worth millions of dollars to someone who you never met, and that person who owns that thing that's worth millions of dollars, he owns it for 9 days, and when the 9 days are over, he sells it right back to you, and he doesn't take any profits from it. Didn't your company make profit over this time? So the whole thing has a very bad taste. It looks what we call a chukuvik. It looks like a joke. You're selling this whole company to the janitor in your shul who you never met, who has no idea. You're selling millions of dollars worth of a company for nothing. He's putting you a $10 down payment. He gets no profits. But here, when you do it with the partners, that has a much more of a legitimate look to it. If one partner sells it to the other, well, they work together. They know each other. They each know what it's worth, and I'm getting something in exchange. And he said, I'm giving you my profits for these days, and you can give me profits for those days in the middle of the summer when you go on vacation. I don't know, you pick the time when you want to be out of the office. You say, for those days, I'm selling you my shares. Okay? If they would do that, that would be a type of a mechira that would have a certain legitimacy to it, and it would avoid a problem that we're going to talk about in a second with the traditional mechiras zones. Okay? But those kind of mechiras don't happen too often. Okay? You realize in order to do the mechira that I just described, you have to get the two partners to sit down, draw up a special contract between them that says, I'm selling to you and you're selling to me, and the whole thing, which could happen, but it would only happen if the people are really more seriously interested or have a very good relationship in a way that they want the mechira to happen. Okay, but in your usual case, it doesn't work like that. Okay, so most people want to just do a, so to speak, a regular mechiras chametz. They go to the rabbi, they sign a piece of paper that says, I'm selling my chametz for Pesach, they sign the thing, and they end the Pesach, and it all gets sold back to them. So our question is that kind of mechira going to be good enough for these people? Okay, so the first question that strikes you is that, wait a second, I made a mechiras chametz, I'm selling my chametz to the guy, how can you say that? Look at my stores open on Pesach. I signed a paper that says, as of 10 o'clock on the morning of every Pesach, my chametz is also to Johnny. Really? At 10:01, your store is out there selling noodles and bread and cookies and everything. So how can you say that I sold it to somebody?
Wrong, that while he owns it, they're still operating.
So I'm the yid. I sold my chametz to the guy. But then I go ahead and sell the guy's chametz to people. It's his chametz. It's not my chametz. How do I have a right? What am I doing selling his chametz? How can you think that this is a real mechira? Well, I sell something to the guy, and then the guy goes, and then I'm going ahead and I'm selling his stuff. So that's sort of a well-known. The Moshe has a number of tshuvas. It was a shilas, actually very similar to what we're talking about, which is the shilas of Wallbaums. It was owned by a Jewish person, Julia Wallbaums. She was a Jewish lady, owned the stores, and she made mechiras chametz, but her store stayed open on Pesach. So Moshe said, we say Tvar Moshe B'Lev and Tvarim. The fact that she doesn't mean it seriously doesn't mean anything. She signed the paper. She made a mechira. On Pesach, she takes things and she sells it to people. So she's a ganav on those things. And she's a ganav, and those food that she sells become usher. But of course, no one cares about that. The food that she sells becomes usher. Someone's buying it on Pesach. Obviously, that person doesn't care about chametz shovel of a Pesach. He doesn't give anything. He's buying bread on Pesach. That food becomes usher. But whatever doesn't get sold on Pesach, that stuff stays mutter because the mechira was challah. The mechira worked. We see them doing things on Pesach, that just, the stores are gone.
But a yid who goes in that store would also be buying stolen stuff.
If a yid goes on Pesach, he's stealing the stuff. But any yid who's going to buy it on Pesach obviously doesn't care about buying.
He's going to buy not chametz.
So because the mechira is only on the chametz. But then when the star mechira says, I'm selling all my chametz to the guy. So if I go in and buy a banana in the store, I didn't steal anything. What happens if I go in and buy a loaf of bread on Pesach? If I do that, you're right, I'm stealing also. But obviously I don't care about that. And that chametz is also. Because when it's stolen, it belongs to the yid temporarily. They kind of by making the gneva, they kind of. So that's chametz shovel of Pesach. Big deal. I'm buying bread on Pesach. Obviously I don't care about these kind of things. Okay? So Ramosha says that, and that's by many people very accepted, that there's no problem. The mechira is chal, even though the store stays open. And that's good. That's a good thing because it helps the owner. The owner is over on less isurim because for whatever they don't steal, they're over on less isurim. Yidden who buy that stuff after Pesach are not over on chametz on Pesach. But the question is like this: all of that kind of a mechira is fine for chametz that the store owned when Pesach started. That's chametz that the store owned when the mechiras chametz happened. But what happens if an hour after the Mechira, the store gets a delivery of bread? So they made a Mechira at 10 o'clock on Erev Pesach, and all the chametz that they owned is sold. At 11 o'clock, up pulls a truck and delivers 100 loaves of bread. So those 100 loaves of bread, they weren't sold. I didn't sell those bread. I only sold what I have. Not only that, did I only sell what I have, so you want to say, okay, we'll put it into the Shtar Mechira, and we'll talk about that. We'll put in the Shtar Mechira that I'm even selling the things that are going to be bought later. He says, but that's Davar Shalom Olam. How can I can't do Mechira on the things that I don't own yet. If I say at 10 o'clock, I'm making Mechiras Chametz happens at 10 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, bread comes. I can't sell the bread that came at 11 o'clock. I couldn't sell it at 10 o'clock because I didn't own it yet. So how is I going to be selling that bread? So Ramosha, in a number of his chuvas, in these chuvas that have to do with wall bounds, these kind of chuvas, he says, the Mechira is only chal for the chametz that the store owned when Pesach started, or when the Mechira happened. Chametz that the store gets later on, is not included in the Mechira. The Mechira happened at 10 o'clock. If they get chametz at 11 o'clock, it's not included. And what happens? That chametz is usher. Okay? What will you do? How will you figure that out? That's a good child. How will you figure that out? That's not for today. How do you figure out? Well, how would you know which came in, which is which? That's a good child. So, but that's what it says in the Tshuva. However, Rabbi Bluth, of course, a big Talmud of Moshe, told Rabbi first. This we didn't remember the day on. Rabbi Bluth told Rabbi first that when Rabbi Moshe wrote those Tshuvas, he was only talking about a situation where you signed the regular Mechiras Chametz. The regular Mechiras Chametz says, as of 10 o'clock in Erev Pesach, I'm selling all my chametz to the garden. But if they would have written in special, I'm selling all my chametz that I have, and I'm selling all the chametz that we buy on Pesach, that would be chal. That's what Rabbi Bluth told Rabbi first. Rabbi Moshe said that. If you write that in specifically, that would be chal. So we'll accept that that's true. The question is, why should it be true? How could such a thing work? How could you make a mechira on the davar shel ba'olam, or what Shecharach was the davar she'ein b'reshusah? How can you make such a mechira? You don't own it. How could you sell the chametz that maybe wasn't even baked yet? If they're going to buy bread on Chol Hamoed, that bread wasn't even baked when you made the Mechiras Chametz. So how can I make a Mechiras Chametz on something that I don't even have, or maybe doesn't even exist yet? Okay, so we asked Rabbi first. How is that going to work? How are you going to do it? Davar shel ba'olam? So Rabbi first says, listen, I don't offhand remember all the details of why it should work. He says, I've looked into it and it does work. He says, I remember right now is that we're being samach on a sheet of a Mordechai. Okay? And it's a Mordechai that we're being samach on to allow such a mechira. But he says, right now it was very busy. The time when we talked to him about it was right before Pesach. He said he'll look into it when it gets a little later, when it's calmer. But for now it was too busy. He says, but we're being samach on a Mordechai. Okay? So it turns out we went looking to see what could we find the sheet of Mordechai that he's being samach on, just to get a havana. We did not get it. How could you make such a mechira? And it turned out we found 3 sheetas of 3 different Mordechais that would have been able to let us be naked about this case. Okay? So go figure, I don't know which one is the right one, but 3 different Mordechais that you could maybe be samach. And they are. All of these Mordechais are in Bab Basra. The first is, the Mordechai says, the din that a davar shel ba'olam, you can't make a kinyan on. That's only true when it's a davar shel ba'olam, when the thing is completely non-existent. But if the thing that you're selling to the person is matzui, it's out there in the market. Okay, it's available in the market, and there's a shar. There's a set price for it, so it's completely accessible and available to the seller. That's not considered davar shel ba'olam. That's considered davar shel ba'olam, even though I don't have it. I don't have the item yet. I myself don't have it yet. It's just out, but it's out there in the market. That's good enough to be considered davar habal olam, and you're allowed to sell. Okay, that sheet of the Mordechai is it's broad. It's a shiloh whether the Shulchan Aruch maybe even brings it himself in the dinim of davar shel ba'olam. It's in Siman Reish Tes in the Chosh Mishpat. In halacha hey and vav, the Mechaber says, if it's a davar habal olam but you don't have it yet, it implies that a kinyan doesn't work. He says it's just a mishapara. In halacha vav, he says that if you sell something that's available in the market and you don't have it yet, you're mechuyev to go out and buy it and give it to the guy. Which implies that the kinyan does work. And therefore you're mechuyev to go out and get it for the guy. You sold it to the guy, even though you didn't have it, you're mechuyev to get it. Okay, so there's a big shayla in the Shach and the Sma over there. Is the Mechaber really passing like this, Mordechai? Or is he not passing like it? That machlokes spills over into machlokes of Ketores and Nesivos. Right there in that simon, Ketores and Nesivos, as to what the Mechaber is trying to pass over there. There's a Chavos Das in Yerdea, who wants to talk about it. There's quite a tumult about this thing, that it can say that the Mechaber is saying, or could be the Achronim who hold, that in fact we pass on this Mordechai, that if the davar is not in your property, but it's available out in the market, then it's considered davar b'olam. And that might cover lots of things. I mean, if let's say the company sells Cheerios, okay, and they get a delivery of Cheerios an hour after the Mechiras Chametz or a day later, Cheerios are available in the market. Supermarkets buy it all the time from General Mills. They're available. There's a price. They know what the price is for it. It's all set and ready to go. So Ken saying that if a mechira could work on that davar she'ena b'reshus or davar she'ena b'olam, because it's available in the market and it has a shar to it. Okay, that's one Mordechai that we could be samachah. That maybe or Moshe you could be samachah. Next, another Mordechai says, the only time the kinyan of davar she'ena b'olam doesn't work is when you say, I want to make a kinyan now on the davar she'ena b'olam. What happens if I say, I'm going to make a kinyan now, but that kinyan is going to be chal as soon as it's b'olam? Okay, I don't want the kinyan to be chal now. I want the kinyan to be chal at the time when it's b'olam. Then there's a sheet, the Mordechai brings such a sheet that says maybe that kinyan of davar she'ena b'olam can be chal. Okay, now, the truth is, the Mordechai says he doesn't like that sheet. The Mordechai says it's not true. He says it's not true. If you can say it should be chal when the thing is b'olam, doesn't work. The Ramah in Bisim and Halacha Daled brings 2 days about that thing. He brings 2 days as to whether that works or not. Maybe when you make a kinyan of davar shalom b'olam to be chal when it will be b'olam, maybe that will work.
But it's still going through the Jewish.
Oh, very good. We're coming to that question. Very good. That's a very good question. We're going to come to that in 1 second. That's a very good question. And the third one is, let me just say the last Mordechai. We'll say some other things. We'll get to that in a second. The third is another Mordechai that says, if you can only not make a kinyan in davar shalom b'olam if you make that kinyan only for the davar shalom b'olam. What happens if you make the kinyan on davar shalom b'olam together with the davar hab'olam? In other words, your kinyan is able to be chal. It's just you want to be chal on more things, even davar shalom b'olam. Then he brings that you're allowed to do that. The Ramah in Halacha Daled also brings that as Zecher that you could be samach on that. I think it's Zecher he brings that you could be samach on that. That then the kinyan on davar shalom b'olam works, which of course is in our case. In our case, you're selling the chametz that you have, and you want to say, I also want to sell the chametz that I'm going to have. So you're including that also. So the Shittas HaMordechai that also should work, even though it's loyal b'olam, but since the kinyan is on other things, then it will work. Okay, so now, before we get to your question, I just want to tell you this. These are all Mordechais that it could be with being samach to allow the kinyan of shalom. Rabbi Raka told us a few people, Shittas that are not Mordechais, that are also to be mitzvah possibly over here, and one is a tshuva of the Skan Aaron. Those are svarim written between World War I and World War II. He's mitzaref. The middle Mordechai that I told you, if you say it'll be chal later on, that Mordechai, together with, it could be that with Kinyan Shtar maybe does work on the davar shalom b'olam. Okay? The Marsham is mitzaref, the Mordechai and some other things. And there's another sheet, a sefer called Mili de Pischa, who says that maybe Kinyan Situmta works in davar shalom b'olam. Kinyan Situmta means that if you have minik hasoichim, you have something that people who do business, they have a certain way that they make a transfer, like they shake hands. That's a famous way of doing it. They shake hands. Shaking hands is not an official kinyan in Choshen Mishpat. Actually, it's in Choshen Mishpat as a situmta. It's not technically in the Torah. It wouldn't be a kinyan, but if the people who do business, that's how they make transactions, then it's going to work. So he wants to be samach on that. Now that shaila, that whether kinyan situmta works for davar shalom b'olam, you know what it means? The soichrim have our practice that they sell things to one another through a certain kinyan, and it works even on a b'olam. Okay, that's 2 days. That's 2 days at the end of Shabbos in the Haggoros Mordechai. Okay, the Haggoros Mordechai, just for your knowledge, the Sefer Haggoros Mordechai, even though it's printed right after the Mordechai, and even though it says Mordechai on the top, and even though it uses the same numbering system as the Mordechai, but the Shem Agdol, the Chidah, says that it's not really the Mordechai. But if you read it, you would never know. It's really hard to know. It says Mordechai on the top, and it uses the same numbers, and it's printed right next to it, but it's really not the Mordechai. Okay, so it doesn't count as another. This is not a fourth Mordechai. Anyway, the Haggoros Mordechai brings 2 days about this. His shaila is a person promised somebody that when he has a baby, this person would be the moil for his baby. And that was considered normal in those days, that people made such commitments before the baby was born. He brings 2 days as to whether that chal because you did something that was up. The minute of the circum was to do that. In those places they did that. But could that work even if Shlomo alone? Just like beforehand, and the Rambam brings such a day. It's a machlokes in Reish Aleph, a machlokes in Ktsos and Nesivos, whether that's correct or not. Okay, so that's another thing to be samach. Okay, so now we're all these now possibilities of what we could be samach on to make a kinyan on davar shlomo. But that brings up the question of what you asked beforehand. Brings up the question like this: let's say in dinei choshe mishpat, a davar shlomo olam, you can make a kinyan on it. You did situmta, you did shtar, you did utel something else. You had a whole bunch of ideas of sometimes the kinyan on davar shlomo olam could work, and maybe that will work in this case. Maybe it would fit into this case. Situmta is...
What is it?
Oh, they actually make a kinyan situmta. One of the kinyanim that the yid and the guy make with each other is they make a kinyan situmta. The point here is not just that they actually make a handshake kind of a kinyan, but in Mechiras Chametz you're allowed to make mechiras on things that you don't yet own. That's considered acceptable practice to commit yourself that thing is being sold. Okay? So the shayla is this. Let's say in Hilchos Choshen Mishpat it's going to work. Let's say it's going to work like that. But what about for Hilchos Chametz? For Choshen Mishpat, it means is that when I finally get that object, it belongs to the selling guy. I made a kinyan and it works. But should we say that the Chametz bounces through the Yid's Rishus? When did the Yid get delivery of the bread? The bread came to him on Pesach. So you want to say that the davar shlomo olam, it was I didn't have it, didn't even exist. The bread wasn't even baked when I made the mechira. But when I get it, the kinyan is going to be chal anyhow. But does it first have to belong to the Yid and then belong to the guy? Does it bounce through the Yid's rishus temporarily, or does it go straight to the guy? So from logic, we would have guessed it bounces through the Yid's rishus. The Yid gets it, and now the kinyan that he made yesterday is now chal to say that it goes to the guy. Well, if the Yid owns it even for a second, it becomes chametz over Pesach. It doesn't have to be that I own it for the whole Pesach. I only own it for a second. So it's logically we might think that, especially in the second Mordechai. The second Mordechai says that a davar shlomo a kinyan could work a davar shlomo if you want to be chal when it will be bol olam. So that means is the kinyan doesn't happen on Erev Pesach. The kinyan happens on Chol Hamoed when I get to deliver your bread. So in that case, we would for sure think that the Yid has to own it, and then the kinyan is chal. It's like waiting. The kinyan is chal, and it belongs to the guy. In which case, it might help for Choshen Mishpat. What does it have to do with us? How does that help us for Chametz over Pesach? So I don't know what the answer to that is, and I'm not sure that I have a good answer to that. But as I mentioned, this Kan Aaron and the Marsham both are being summoned on this Mordechai in the Chametz over Pesach. Okay, some of the other sheets we talked about before, we'll talk about Pesach. The Marsham and the Kan Aaron are both talking about being summoned on this for Chametz over Pesach. And not only that, this Kan Aaron, when he brings this, makes a whole point. If he answers a kasha by saying that specifically the Yid said, I'm going to get the Chametz on Pesach, and when I get it, then it's going to be sold to you. Okay, so he makes a whole to-do that's the point, that the king is only going to be chal later on. The Yid's going to get it first. So somehow they were comfortable, and they assumed the Yid does not own it. Okay? But we need to understand that. Why Taka isn't like that? If the Yid gets it on Pesach, and the king doesn't happen, hardly the king can't happen until it comes to the Yid. So the Yid gets it, doesn't the Yid own it for a second as it passes through his resource? Okay? So we've heard all these different possibilities as to why it could be that if you make a mechira, the mechira could be chal even on the davar shlomo olam, even, or should we say, the davar she'ein b'reshus, even though the Yid doesn't have the chametz yet, he can make the mechira, and that might be what Rav Moshe had in mind, and that might be a reason to be silent. But if you want to do this, you have to just remember, if you want to do this, then the Yid, when he makes his mechiras chametz, he has to write in his shtar harshah, when he gives permission to the Rav to sell it, he has to write in, and I'm selling the chametz that I'm going to get on Pesach also. That's not what it says in the regular shtar harshah. He has to speak that out, he's going to get that. Most Yidden don't get chametz on Pesach. So he has to write that into his shtar harshah. And the Rav, when he sells the chametz to the guy, he has to also write that in. He has to write that into his shtar. I'm selling to you all the chametz owned by these Jews, and any chametz that these Jews will get on Pesach. If they don't speak it out, it's not going to be included. It's only included if you speak it out. If you don't speak it out, that's not going to be part of the mechira. So you have to have a modified shtar harshah and a modified mechira to include that. Okay? So, but potentially, we have all these something to be made on it. And as we heard, Rabbi Booth told Rabbi First that you could be samach on that, and Rabbi Schwartz would have been Samech on it also. But on all these struggling to be Mako, why you could do the kinyan even on the stuff you didn't have, but you have to do it. Doesn't help if you don't do it. You have to actually speak it out that you're doing the kinyan for those things. There's one other possibility. It's related to what we said before, which is maybe the Yid should not sell his chametz to the guy, but he should sell his shares in the company to the guy. Okay? Now, before I spoke, I said a good idea would be for the Yid to sell to his partner. Okay? But there are those who won't let the Yid sell his ownership. He owns 15% of a company, 20% of a company, he'll sell it to the guy. He'll sell his ownership of the company. Then, of course, there wouldn't be problems with Davar Shalom B'Olam. It wouldn't be Davar Shalom B'Olam because the guy owns the company. All the things that go on in over Pesach are the guys. Okay? The two possible questions that's wrong with that is, one is, what I mentioned before, the chuchav. Come on, what kind of joke is it that I'm giving you my company, you own it for 10 days, I never met you before, and you get no profits from it? Okay? So that's a question whether that chuchav, the fact that it looks like such a joke, like a farce, is enough to destroy the Mechira. Okay? Is it just so, obvious that it's not a Mechira? And the second thing is, if a person was to sell his ownership of a company to somebody else, there may be legal requirements. You may not be able to just write on a piece of paper, I'm selling you my company. There may be legal requirements when you make a transaction of that sort. There may be legal requirements. Dayan Weiss, in his truth about this, at the beginning of Cher Gimel of Mechiras Chametz, in one paragraph he brings a number of Rabbanim who talk about this, who seem to be making. That even if you didn't meet all the legal requirements for a transaction, can say that it works minhadin anyhow, even if the legalities of it maybe wouldn't stand up in court. Because if you just say, I'm selling you my, $50 million worth of shares of this and this company, legally it might not work, but even so it might be good for Mechiras Chametz. Okay, so just to wrap up what we said, we have a company. If you have a supermarket that's owned by a Yid has a portion of it, he owns a partial share of that company. The supermarket is doing business on Pesach, that's buying and selling chametz like regular. So is it possible that chametz might be motive to Pesach? So we had two main possibilities of Tvimekel. One was the Zecher Yitzchok, and those who say like him, that if the Yid's portion is less than 50%, then the Yid's portion is buckled, it doesn't count, and it's as if it was owned by a guy. That was one possibility. And the second possibility was that if the Yid would make a Mechiras Chametz, and they would make a special Mechiras Chametz that would include in it a provision that says, we're not only selling the chametz that we own, but we're selling the chametz that we're going to buy on Pesach also, then there are a whole bunch of reasons why that might work, a whole bunch of tzirufim, all kinds of shitas that might be enough to be samacham, that the kinyan should be found even on the chametz that the Yid doesn't own yet, and it might be good enough. Either one of these things would be good enough to be matter the chametz. Rabbi Schwartz, for sure, was said you could be samacham the Zecher Yitzchok. Maybe even, I believe he even said you could be samacham the other thing also. In which case, under the right circumstances, the chametz might be much.